Hello and welcome back to another ProGuides video. What's the meta now that Wild Assassins are gone? What synergies are still okay? Well, let's explore all that together as our Challengers and Grandmasters players have put together a new Synergies tier list for you. Keep in mind that forcing a composition and going for a synergy in S tier does not guarantee you a victory over a synergy in D tier. There are many other factors involved between items and what champions you get from early to late game. However, we're here to show you what the synergies are that are most worthwhile and that are consistently placing in the top 4. We evaluate not only how consistent the build wins, but also how hard the criterias are to achieve that build, the items required, and also the synergy at its different tiers. But before we begin, remember to click our link below in our description to see more in-depth guides, builds, and ways to win you your next games. There are many courses designed by pro players within the top 1% of the game to teach you all the meta and how to effectively climb up the ladder. So if you want to get into the top 4 of your games, then go to ProGuides.com today and we will see you over there. Link will be included in the description below. With that in mind, let's get back to the video. Beginning with our S tier, which includes Brawlers, Sorcerers, Imperial, Knight, and Shapeshifters. So first up, Brawlers. Brawlers keeps going back and forth from being one of the worst to one of the best synergies ever. Currently, there's at least 3 top comps that are running Brawlers. You can go Hextech Brawlers, which is the most popular one, Void Brawlers, or even Sorcerers Brawlers with a Twisted Fate. The health buffs overall makes the synergy tanky, but what makes the synergy so frightening is their CC. Cho'Gath provides one of the best CC in the game, while Volibear, Vi, Rek'Sai, Blitzcrank, and Warwick all provide some sort of stun or knock-up as well. Volibear also received another buff this patch, which is a huge plus to the synergy. However, if you don't want to use Brawlers for your tanks, then next up is everyone else's favorites, which are Knights. Even with the nerf in 9.20, they are still extremely strong early and late game. If you're able to get 2 Knights to level 2 during the first few rounds, good chance is that you'll be able to go on a winning streak, which is a huge advantage in the game. Even for late game, Morrocrux makes for a great phantom buff. Sejuani is a must in many top comps for a stun, and Darius is used for his Imperial buff to Katarina, Swain, and Draven. There's so many good Knights to name, making them in our S tier for the 3rd patch in a row. Next up on our list is Sorcerers, which has made itself back to the top after the nerf on Wild Assassins. Achieving 3 Sorcerers for the first tier buff is fairly easy. Aurelion Sol and Karthus are powerhouses on their own, and combined with the 40% spell damage bonus you get when you reach the first synergy tier, they tend to one-shot many enemies. Recently, the meta of Guardians, Dragons, and Sorcerers have been seen as one of the strongest meta games with its extreme tankiness and damage from these 2 champions. If you haven't seen our guide on it, go check it out now. Video link will be available at the end of the video. Moving on to Imperials, 9.20 have changed the champion drop rates once you hit level 8 and 9. It used to be at 5% and 8% of finding them, which has now doubled to 12% and 15%, which means it's actually pretty easy to aim for a full Imperial build. Simply choose your carry, either put Seraphs and Arcane Gauntlet on Katarina, or Morellos and GA on Swain, or even simply Bloodthirster and Guinsoo's on Draven. And if you're able to get items for all 3 units, then you've got yourself a team that can destroy almost everyone. Last on our list is Shapeshifters. Shyvana, Gnar, and Swain can carry your late game team by themselves. Besides them, Nicolai and Jace are very strong starts as well for the early game. Nidaleigh's heal and damage comes in clutch often, and Jace with Titanic Hydra is much stronger than you would think. All these shapeshifters transform pretty quickly, which leads to an increased buff to your comps, health, and DPS. With shapeshifters units going from 1 cost to 5 cost, it's a very steady transition to make the full comp. Now onto our A tier list, which are Wild, Void, Hextech, Elementalist, Ninja, Dragon/Guardians. Let's go over Wild first. There was a minor nerf on Wild going from 12% to 10%. Even though Wild Assassins took a larger hit, there are still other comps that work, which are Wild Shapeshifters and Wild Sorcerers. The Wild buff is great against Yordles, Phantom Dancer, and all the new dodge items that were introduced in patch 9.19. Besides that, the synergy is fairly easy to achieve since the hardest unit to get is an epic Gnar, but him alone is one of the strongest units in the game right now, improving the synergy's tier a lot, landing it in the A tier. Moving on is Void. With the death of Void Assassins was the beginning of Void Brawlers. Kai'Sa got a nice buff in the last patch. Although it does not make her an incredibly OP unit, she does at least do enough to be counted as a legendary. All the other Voids are fairly easy to find as well, with Cho'Gath doing an immense amount of CC and damage. The buff turning all Void units into true damage provides not only a great source of DPS, but it's a great counter towards Nobles, Guardians, and Knights. Next up is Hextech, which also lands in our A tier. Items are incredibly important, and many players suffer from forgetting to position against Hex Tech. So if you're against someone who obviously never watched our positioning guide, then run their whole team with a 3-man Hex Tech. On the other hand, even if you're against a smart player, there's the RNG chance for it to hit on the unit that matters most. Either that hyper carry Draven in the back or the GA Sejuani in the front. With the influx of items though, there are many more ways to play around Hex Tech that players are just not utilizing enough. Moving on with Elementalist. Elementalist has always been good, and we don't think they'll ever change. All units are strong, but squishy enough that they're not overpowering anyone. Lissandra and Kennen have been the most useful units in this meta, especially with the GA and Morelos. Not only that, the synergy only requires 3 units, which makes it easy to go for. Unfortunately, we're seeing less of Elementalist in top tier comps due to the fact that a sword is usually saved for a Giant Slayer or Rod is used for Ionic Sparks, making there less Elementalist in S tier comps. Speaking of Elementalists though, they are usually best paired with our next A tier synergy, which are ninjas. Kennen is a ninja already, so it's only 6 units you need to complete a ninja elemental comp. If you're able to find this comp early, the power spike is huge, which can knock out a lot of players earlier than expected. Even though IE and Assassins got a bit of a nerf, Zed and Nicolai can still definitely one-shot players if you stack some IEs on them. Even if you don't go for this comp though, all ninjas by themselves are fairly strong and can be utilized just for the tier 1 ninja buff. Lastly is Guardians and Dragons. Don't get us wrong, Guardians and Dragons are one of the best defensive measures you have in the game. All units involved are great and powerful in their own way. Leona and Pantheon are both tanks that provide crucial stuns. Pantheon is especially the main star as he is both a Guardian and Dragon. If you're against a team of Warmogs, Redemptions, and Lifesteal, well, put one Pantheon down and now you got a Morelos effect. Besides him, Aurelion has his massive AoE damage, Shyvana has her intense DPS, and Braum is one of the greatest early game tanks. We put Guardians and Dragons in the A tier because it's more situational. Against a bunch of Voids and Giant Slayers, Guardians will lose their effectiveness, whereas Dragon comps will be countered by another Dragon comp. It's a synergy that you look to add during the mid to late game if you need it. Moving on is the B tier, with Blade Masters, Exile, Robot, Phantom, Demons, and Assassins. So first up is Blade Master and Exile. Unfortunately, they are countered heavily in today's meta with the popularity of Guardians and Knights. However, if you're able to get a strong Blade Master start, you may be able to get your enemy's health low enough that they die before they can reach their full build of finding that Pantheon or Kayle for Knights and Guardians. Blade Masters with the right items, especially using Draven as a hyper carry, can still be viable. Meanwhile, Exile is put with Blade Master because the only one unit with the synergy is Yasuo. The synergy itself doesn't feel like too much at the moment since it's only one unit and is just a shield gain, but Yasuo itself is an incredibly strong unit that becomes a great strength to a Blade Master comp. Next, we have Robot. Robot essentially means Blitzcrank in TFT. Although he is crucial in a brawler's composition, especially with getting Jinx that early rocket, he can be countered easily. The higher elo you go, the more players will play smarter against Blitzcrank, such as putting a level 2 Sejuani in the corner, so when you pull her, she ends up stunning your entire team. With Blitzcrank, it's essentially a mind game with your opponents to see who can position their units better. Normally, it's easy for your opponents since they can put tanks on both sides of the board. Next is Phantom. Phantom is great because it only requires 2 units, with one being a common and the other 2 being an epic and legendary. It's a buff you add towards your late game. Although it is random, being able to get an enemy unit down to 100 HP is a great advantage. However, since it is completely RNG based, we can't justify putting this synergy in an S tier. Getting our Hyper Phantomed is too detrimental, while getting a level 1 Mord in the back Phantom means absolutely nothing for you. Let's hope Riot allows us to target who we want to Phantom so players can actually position and try to play around Phantom. Moving on to Demons. Most Demons are strong on their own. Along with that, they can help with slowing down Shapeshifters from transforming, or Cho and Sejuani from casting their abilities. Overall though, most Demons suffer from being too low health, so they're eventually losing out to the tankiness of Knights or the DPS of Draven and Jinx, which does not rely on mana. The synergy is good for a strong start, but can become incredibly weak if you don't pair them with a stronger synergy. Going for 6 Demons is rarely worth it anymore. Last is Assassins. Assassins have received a nerf again, leaving most of the units incredibly underwhelming. However, 4 units still shine and can be used in the meta. There's Zed or Akali that can be stacked with IE, there's Katarina, who is perfect for clearing the backline during an Imperial build, and Pyke for some extra CC. Although these units are still worthwhile, 3 Assassins is seeing less play than before, and the 6 unit synergy is no longer worth it. Next is our C tier with Noble, Gunslingers, Yordles, Rangers, and Glacial. So let's talk about Nobles. Nobles early game can be effective if it lands on your Lucian or even a level 2 Fiora, but for the most part, it's no longer a guarantee of a win streak with the nerfs they received a few patches ago. It's incredibly difficult to transition from 3 Nobles to 6 Nobles as well, because you'll start to fall off very hard mid-game when you're missing your Kale. Even when you find all 6 Nobles, Morellos or red buff Gunslingers can easily counter this composition. Next is Gunslingers, which is probably the biggest G-bait in this patch. In PvE, the buff was great with the additional targets being increased to 1, 3, and 5, but when then official notes came out, it was only 1, 2, and 4. Only the last tier was buffed, which, let's be honest, most people don't go for 4, let alone 6 Gunslingers, because it's generally just not worth it. You need the perfect item sets and best start to make it work. However, 2 Gunslingers is still fairly strong and is prominent in comps like Hextech Brawlers. Moving on with Yordles. Yordles is a bit better this patch since Wild Assassins is no longer part of the popular meta. However, they can still be countered by Wild in general and are prone to AoE damage. Thus, any Sorcerer's comps usually destroys Yordles as well. The champion pool is not bad though, with Lulu, Kennen, Poppy, and Gnar being extremely powerful. 3 Yordles early can provide you the quick head start, but 6 Yordles are not worth it. Let us know if you know anyone who's able to get 9 Yordles to work though. Will Riot finally be adding Teemo to TFT? Next up is Rangers. It's sad to see them in C tier as they were so strong a few patches ago. Unfortunately, the unlimited stuns from Ashe is no more as there's so many Knights and Guardians around. There's also a lot of units that can burst her down too. Nowadays, Kindred is only used for Phantom, Kai'Sa is used for Void, and Vayne is used in a hyper-roll strategy for Knights. The units on their own are not bad, but no one truly goes for Rangers anymore as their main focus. Moving on to the final one in our C tier, Glacial, which is nice to have. It's as simple as that. You don't go for hitting the tier 2 or tier 3 of this synergy, or else your comp might become too weak. However, the first tier is nice, especially with Sejuani being so prominent in many comps. But let's be honest, we use Sejuani for her ability and maybe a Braum in there as well for his tankiness, and not because we're aiming for their slow auto stuns. With Rangers and Ashe falling low, Glacial also loses their strength and popularity. And now for our last tier, the D tier is just Pirates. Let's be honest, has there ever been a point in the game where you said to yourself, man, I wish I found Pirates so I can make my comp stronger? Sure, if you found them during your neutral rounds, it can be a nice little way to get additional income and econ early. But the average is only 1.75 gold per round, and there's already been an influx of gold during the neutral rounds, making this synergy unnecessary and not something people will use to win their games. And that was it for this 9.20 synergy list. What are some of your favorite synergies to play, and what videos would you like to see come from us next? Let us know in the comments below as we read each and every one of them. We're getting super close to that 10,000 subs, guys, so be sure to like and subscribe, and we will see you all next time.